Well, good morning. It's nice to be here with you this morning, and we are very grateful for the opportunity to share just a little bit in a bird's eye view the work that we're doing with the European Baptist Federation. Now, if you're wondering this morning if I'm embarrassed or if why I have this red glow, it's because I enjoyed the beauty of Peggy's Cove and the waterfront all day yesterday. I forgot to use sunblock. So the kids thought I was really stressed. The kids thought I was stressed this morning, so that's why they thought my face was so bright red. But I'm actually quite calm right now, so just so you know. It's great to be here, and we are so thankful because this is a once in every 2 or 3 year opportunity that we have to thank you in person, to show our gratitude and to give you a bit of a shareholders report of what's been going on in the work that we have been doing on your behalf within the EBF. And so this morning, I want to take not so much time, but just to give you some stories and a bit of an overview to help you to be able to pray more effectively and also to praise God along with us about what God is doing in this work. So if I was to take you into work in the EBF with me, we'd have to do a little bit of language training. And in order to do that, we'd have to learn a few languages. So first we could start with a very basic word like good day, but then we would have to do buongiorno, buenos dias, merhaba, guten tag, and I could go on and on and on. There's 35 languages that are represented within the European Baptist Federation. And this particular work is a unique work. It's not one that's very common throughout the world. The gathering of Baptists in so many different nations, in 52 nations, spreading from across Central and Eastern Europe. We'll turn the slide to Central and Eastern Western Europe, the Middle East, Central Asia, and as well as North Africa. So we have a very elastic definition of what the European Baptist Federation is all about. These countries came together 60 years ago, approximately 60 years ago, in a federation, a fellowship, as it were, to support those countries that were behind the communist walls and the Iron Curtain and behind the Berlin Wall and these sort of regimes. Those countries that were under oppression really needed support, and the West did many, many things financially, with education, through our institution at IBTS, which at that time was in Ruchlakon, Switzerland. But now we enjoy a relative freedom, not entirely through all of our work, because some of our countries are still under occupation or under regimes. Countries like Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan. Some of these countries experience human rights issues where churches are burned, pastors are imprisoned, and we have a lot of persecution, underground churches in some of these countries. So we don't have, and I couldn't say that the whole EBF enjoys that freedom, but now most of Eastern Europe is free. And what has happened is there's been incredible growth. Hundreds of churches being planted, thousands of people coming to Christ, and Eastern Europe is actually teaching Western Europe how to plant churches through their enthusiasm. So the EBF has had a long history, and it is changing and evolving constantly. And we were invited to be a part of that history in 2002 when CBM asked if we would go to live in Europe to offer ourselves as in the area of youth leadership training. And in 2003, January, I was commissioned by the EBF Youth and Children's Conference, and there was a special meeting, a council that was gathered of all the youth and children's workers of these nations, and they asked me to do a research study that looked at the scope of youth ministry training in all of these 52 nations. Now, that was a bit of a daunting task. I remember when it was first presented to me, I was a little bit overwhelmed by the prospect of doing this, but I embraced it, and within 18 months of listening to hundreds and hundreds of people and visiting many nations, I had an opportunity to compile a report of the needs of these various nations. There's incredible diversity within the EBF. There's some 3,000, some countries have 3,000 Baptist churches, like Ukraine or Great Britain. But then many of our countries are very, very tiny, where we'll have 12 or 20 or even 30 churches just in one nation alone. And so what we found is that there was some 3 themes all throughout those different nations in terms of the needs of youth work. Talking about the EBF and youth work is like talking about Baskin-Robbins ice cream. There's 52 flavors. Every single country has a story, and every single country has a unique need. And so that report was compiled, And in 2005, I presented it to the council. This was the gathering of all the general secretaries of the EBF, and they were meeting in Prague at the time. And I was a little bit afraid that that report might be put on a shelf, that it wouldn't be used, but I was thrilled they embraced it. And so much so that the General Secretary of the EBF, Tony Peck, invited CBM to ask us to stay permanently as a staff member of the European Baptist Federation to work as their youth ministry coordinator and to implement what I had seen in this study. And that's been an incredible honor for us. I'm the only non-European on the committee. As a Canadian, I hold that in great trust. It has opened an immense amount of doors. Being a Canadian has an opportunity because I can go in with a certain degree of neutrality. If I was from any particular European country, there's always a history that follows European countries. So if I was to speak in one particular country and I was of a particular European nation, then there would be these biases. As a Canadian, I have these open doors, and that's been an amazing, amazing gift. So I hold it dearly and really appreciate the trust that has been given to us. So during this period since 2005, the goal has been to create a new program. This is actually the committee that I serve with. This is the committee that commissioned me to do that study. Now, this is not the exact same committee because I've lived through 3 chair people and 20 members of the committee. I'm the old granddad of the committee now because I've been serving for 10 years and everyone's elected to these positions, and so I continue on in perpetuity. But it's been wonderful working with these dear friends who are representatives of various nations. In this group I have Norway, Germany, Sweden, Estonia, and Bulgaria, just in that one group. But this is the group that I work with. This is the group I am answerable to. Even though I wear many hats, this is really, in essence, the group that I have embraced and worked with. So what came out of that study was that I had to create a training material that would, some sort of curriculum, something that would offer the youth workers of Europe and the Middle East and Central Asia a resource. Because many of these nations don't have these kind of resources that we enjoy in Canada. We have a seminary that has a dedicated youth ministry track in the Master of Divinity program. We have training programs like crazy here that are wonderful opportunities for youth leaders and youth workers in Canada. But many of these nations do not enjoy that same privilege. And so this was the mandate as our committee wanted to resource these countries that needed this kind of assistance. There was 4 things that they requested. One is that the material would be in their language if possible. Many of them, of course, do not speak English, and they would really appreciate having it in their language. Secondly was accessibility. It's not easy to actually get access to good materials, and so they wanted to have access. Third was affordability. Many of our countries are impoverished nations, especially now in this current economic crisis, which has enveloped Europe. So it's not easy to actually afford to travel to training or to even purchase materials. And the 4th one was to be contextual, something that would apply to their local cultural situation. They didn't want something imported from the US or from the UK, but something that really connected to their culture. That was a tall order, but it came in the form of a program called Horizons, and this is now available and has been for 2 years. It took 2.5 years to develop this program, but it is, we met those 4 requirements. It's accessible because it's on the internet, so everybody can have access to this course. It's a 4-unit course with 24 modules in total. It covers the basics of youth ministry from beginning to end, and it was written with a lot of help from different specialists in Europe and in Canada to help us create this curriculum. So this was the first thing. The second thing was that it had to be affordable, so we have not charged for this. Anybody can log into the program from Europe and the EBF and take it for free. The Canadians that now do this course are actually, as a missional support, are paying a nominal fee of $40 to take this course, and that money is turned back into Horizons to help those countries that cannot afford to have training. So I thought that was really special. This was decided by the Canadian Baptist Youth leaders. It wasn't my decision. They wanted to offer that to help as a missional opportunity. So then there was, the third thing was the contextualization, and that was a big one. That was probably the hardest one to work in. And what we do now is we train mentors, people who are local leaders from their countries who will lead the program within their own cultural context. So a Moldovan who's taking this course in Horizons will be mentored by a Moldovan youth leader, somebody who knows the program and can work with them, because they know their own culture, they know their own context, and it makes the material come to life in their situation. And so that way it can be used in the Middle East. And as far as languages, we have it in Arabic, French, in Spanish, and Russian, and Norwegian. And we also have it in right now, it's being translated into Welsh and into Serbian. So Horizons as a program has become an amazing resource that's not only being offered throughout the EBF nations, but also is now being recognized globally. And 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to be in South America for a meeting with the Baptist Rural Alliance, and we rolled it out to all the Baptist leaders, of young Baptist youth leaders from across South America had come to this meeting, and they were so excited about it that they have embraced it as a continent. So we have conversations with India right now, where there would be tens of thousands of youth workers taking this program, and so on and so on. So there's all kinds of exciting things and synergy happening with this program that we never envisioned when we first started out in that simple study. And so God is blessing it, and we offer this to be used. There's a young man in Bridgewater, Nova Scotia that I want to give a special word of thanks to, because he has donated his time. He's an educator. He teaches online for those that are upgrading their high school education. He's based in Bridgewater. And he has donated all the services and the time to make this program a success in terms of all the mechanics of it. And it is huge. You see a front page. Behind it, there's thousands of pages of detail and multiple languages and all kinds of stuff. And we're going under a big refit of the program now, that in another month, we're rolling out a whole new platform that we hope will be even more helpful to youth workers around the world. I want to share some stories with you, just a few short stories to put some faces to the ministry. We can talk in generalities, but I want to give you some of the exciting stories, and I could tell you dozens, but I've chosen just a select few to give you a feel for it. Croatia, as you know, is a country that came out of the devastation of the Yugoslavian war. Not too long ago, in 1991, they sought their independence. And at that time, many of the churches were just rebuilding. There wasn't a lot of time to be spent in training leaders or any kind of development that way. They were just trying to survive and rebuild after the shattering war that they had gone through. And so one of the youth leaders from that country, who was the national leader, Svetlana Mraz, she had been wanting for 20 years to gather youth leaders for a training conference. And she came to me one day and she said, can we use Horizons in our situation, but not use the internet? And I was like, okay, that's fine, sure. I'd spent all this time on the internet. I was wondering, how on earth can we do this? She said, we'd like to do it in live seminars. And I said, let's do it. So we created what's called now Horizons Live. We've taken the material from the internet and now have created live weekend seminars that youth leaders can take. This first group that gathered, there was about 50 of them out of 60 churches in Croatia that gathered for the very first time, and it was an exciting and wonderful event. We had all kinds of things happen in terms of the learning process, but also God had another agenda, as you will see in many of the stories I share. In this agenda, he wanted to bring unity amongst the Croatian Baptists. And as you know, sometimes churches and they have some sort of rivalry sometimes, and that existed in Croatia. And so many of the youth had come from churches that hadn't spoken to each other in decades. So when they were put together in small groups, they didn't have a choice on that matter. So they were sort of sitting there looking at each other like this for a while. But then God broke through. They started to talk, and they started to pray, and there were tears, and there was all kinds of reconciliation that took place. So much so that when I heard 2 weeks later, people were saying, have you heard what's happening in Croatia? And I said, what? They said, the youth workers are on fire. The churches are coming to life. And God is bringing in a reconciliation not only amongst the youth, but between churches, and has created this unity amongst the 60 churches. So it was a phenomenal conference. And the Croatians love conferences so much, and they love to gather because they hadn't gathered for so long, that they've had 8 of these leadership training conferences in the past 2 years. And this group will be graduating And a new group will be starting in November, and I'll be going back for the new leadership training group that'll be starting for youth leadership. So be in prayer for Croatia, that God will continue to use that enthusiasm, that spirit of reconciliation and unity, and he will reach out to the Croatians of that country. Another story that I want to share is from Norway. 3 months ago, actually more than 3 months ago, I was invited to speak to the Norwegian Baptists at their 90th anniversary service of their youth ministry, of their youth work of Norway. And at the same time, I was also asked to train the mentors for the New Horizons program. They had translated it into Norwegian, and they had 6 mentors that were being trained to be leaders for this national curriculum that they were rolling out across the country. So that was a very exciting weekend, and one of the things that I didn't see that happened, which was really interesting, was there's about 150 participants in the program. And on one half of the sanctuary, more or less, there was about half of them were Norwegian born, and the other half were from Burma or from Myanmar, depending on which country you remember. And I was very surprised to see that. There was a huge influx of immigration from Burma, Baptists who have started churches and in Norway. And there was equally as many of them as there were Norwegian born. And that was just an amazing thing. They're from the Chin language group, and they had come to me and asked me, is it possible to translate Horizons into Chin? And I said, of course. And their missional goal is that they want to reach out to all the people who've left Burma around the world and use Horizons as a training program for youth workers. So again, something that I had not anticipated going to Norway to be talking about having translation of Horizons into Chin. So just an amazing way that God uses things for his purposes. Be in prayer for the Norwegians as they try to understand how to deal with immigration. It's something that's new to them. And many European countries are experiencing that now. Now that we don't have borders between many of our nations within Europe, you can travel freely between many of our countries within the European Union. And so there's a lot of migration. We have Russian churches in Italy, we have Ukrainian churches in Portugal, we have just this incredible mix happening, and many European countries don't know how to handle that. And they're looking to us as Canadians and saying, how do you handle this concept of multiculturalism? So it's very interesting. Another story is just to talk a little bit about France. And the French Baptist Union has undergone some stress over the past 20 years. Western Europe generally is struggling with a lot of secularism and just nominalism and all kinds of isms. And so France, in particular, has suffered a great deal. This past 2 years, though, there's been some bright rays of hope. And the young man that's in the center of this group, next to the lady on the couch, his name is Jean-Marc Razafrendoneri. And he is the man who is responsible for trying to rally the youth work of France. He's a social worker by trade, profession, and also a professional musician. Family of 5, very busy man. But he's asked his employer if he can take 2 days off a week without pay for the next 2 years so that he can work for the French Baptists and try to rebuild that work. And he's already done that for 1 year, and he's done an amazing job at networking. Now he's asked me to work with them in trying to use Horizons in French to use it as a training program for the national leaders of the 123 churches that are in France. So I was so impressed when I went to visit him in his home at that sacrifice that he is making financially. He's not a wealthy man. To give up 2 days of pay, that's a big sacrifice for 2 years. But he is so committed to this. They also have a new general secretary. His name is Marc Derriot. And what I didn't realize when I was training 3 mentors, Jean-Marc had asked me to train 3 mentors, was that the 3 people that showed up was the general secretary, the chairman of the French Baptist Union, and a member of the board of the French Baptist Union. They believe in this from the top down. They are so committed. And I met Marc Derriot, who's just brand new in the job, and he has a new vision and a passion to reunite and to rebuild the French Baptist work. So be in prayer for France and for Western Europe. It's not easy, and many of the countries there are still struggling to continue their witness in very secularized societies. We're going to just skip ahead one more, please. Thank you. I'd like to share 2 stories for the future. I've shared a little bit about the past, but this one comes from very recent, the recent future. Recent past, I guess. It was at our graduation at our seminary just a couple months ago. One of our students, whose name is Zlatko Shabasta, is from Serbia. And Serbia, as you know, is also part of the former Yugoslavia, and in many ways struggled probably most in terms of economics after everything was settled. As a nation, it is one of the poorer countries. And Zlatko had come to me and he had said, is it possible for me to translate Horizons into Serbian? And I said, of course, we'd love to do that. And I also at that same time said, I think we should pay you to do that translation, because I knew that he was going back to no employment. Many of the pastors, if not all the pastors in Serbia, are tent makers. They don't have salaries from their churches, and there are no paid youth workers. In fact, in all of the EBF, there's only about 500 out of the 35,000 youth workers that are paid. So we deal with a lot of volunteers, pastors who are volunteering time. So Zlatko said, no, I'll do it for free. And I said, no, we can do this. We should pay you because we paid for each language translation. And this will help you and his new wife, Yarmila. They just were married this year. We said, this will help get you started. And our committee, the EBF Youth and Children's Committee, has a little stipend for translation, so we wanted to give that to them as he begins this work. And he is really committed to reaching out to Serbian youth culture. Many of the youth in Europe now are struggling. As you know, the economic crisis is hitting Europe. Some countries worse than others. Some countries have been used to that for a long time. So this is not big news. But Western Europe and Spain and many countries like this are experiencing this teetering on the knife edge. And young people are hit the hardest economically. Spain, for example, has 75% of youth are unemployed. We're talking youth being 30 and down. Okay? And 1 in 4 people in Spain is out of work. 30% of salaries of people who have existing salaries have been garnished by 25-30% for this austerity plan. So young people are struggling, and in Serbia it's no different. So Zlatko is going back to encourage and to train young leaders in Serbia to help them to give hope to those who are hopeless. When the walls came down and there was all kinds of freedom in 1989, when we watched the Berlin Wall came down, we watched the fall of the Soviet Union, everyone was enthusiastic. Europe had a new view and a new optimism, young people especially, that we were going to have all kinds of employment opportunities. And there was all kinds of money flowing within the European Union. But then this crisis has hit, and even in the last 6 months, it has become desperate. And young people now are living for today because they have no clue what will happen tomorrow. And there's this new neo-hedonism sort of coming about where we party like crazy tonight because tomorrow we don't know if we'll have any money or if we'll even be alive tomorrow. And there's that incredible, palpable desperation that's in youth culture now that's happened almost overnight. So this is something that we're looking at in terms of offering hope to the hopeless. This is a really big challenge for us in the work with young people. And this will be what we'll be looking at over the next several years, I believe, with our work in the EBF, how we can work with young people who are so desperate. Last September, our council, the gathering of all of these nations, I keep pointing here because if you haven't seen, we have a display of some of our flags. I say some because the table wasn't big enough to hold them all. But we gather as a council every year. This is what we call the grown-ups group. We do this as a youth and children's work group, but the general council meets every year. We are invited to Israel, and every year we're invited by a different nation, but this year it was Israel. And we were so privileged because the Baptists of Israel are made up of about 800 Arabic-speaking believers. And they've been around for 100 years. This was their 100th year of Baptist witness. So we had a wonderful celebration with them. And the Baptists of Israel suffer in different ways, in a silent way, really, because they are not seen as really an important part of society. Of course, they're not Jewish, and they're not Muslim. So they don't fit into either of those categories. But they're also not recognized as a mainline denomination because their numbers are so small. So the state of Israel doesn't recognize the Baptists. They're allowed to worship, but they don't have any official capacity. So you can't be married by a Baptist pastor. You can't be buried by a Baptist or any kind of affiliation with the Baptists on an official level. And they've been lobbying for that for years, but it's just never happened. But if that wasn't bad enough, that sort of segregation and that feeling of separation, and I have to say, they don't let that hold them down. They're very passionate, very silent, loving believers, if I can put it that way. They're not silent because they can't speak, but their love has to be careful because they live in Islamic communities. And so they have to be careful, but at the same time, too, they also have to be careful on so many other levels. But I was invited to go. That was the council was in Nazareth, and Nazareth is the area where most of the Baptists live. So around the Sea of Galilee, there's Baptist churches. I went to the Baptist Church of Cana. I've been in the Baptist Church of Nazareth, and have some wonderful friends there. But I was invited to go with the executive committee of the EBF. There's about 20 of us to go to Bethlehem for a meeting. And we went deliberately on purpose to the Palestinian territory for one reason, and one reason only. It was because many of those Baptist brothers and sisters who live in that region, who have Baptist churches and who live there, are not allowed to go to Nazareth. They couldn't join us for the council because they're surrounded by this wall. And many of you know, and the politics of Israel is always a hot potato. It's not one I enter into lightly. But there are dear believers, brothers and sisters, who live in this area, in Ramallah and Bethlehem and in Gaza. And they are trying to, in their own way, reach out with silent but meaningful Christian witness. So we went to visit them because they couldn't come to us, and we had a wonderful time. And I met this young man, Michael Kakish, and his wife Lily, and they are he is the youth secretary, or I wouldn't call him youth secretary, he's basically the volunteer who is leading to encourage the youth leaders of the Palestinian territory. And this wall that you see here that surrounds this area, this region, is just about as tall as this room in here. The Berlin Wall just barely reached to about here. So that gives you an idea. Our German, president of our Baptist Federation this year is German, and he's probably in his late 60s, a wonderful statesman. But when he saw this wall, the tears just started streaming down his face because it was like going back to Germany 20 years ago when they were separated by the Berlin Wall. And this is the reality that is faced now and today. And I'm not trying to make any political statements, but just to help you realize that there are brothers and sisters who live in this area who are trying to do the best they can. Michael asked me to come and do training for these youth leaders because they can't go to youth training events in Nazareth. And I said I'd be happy to do that because Horizons is in Arabic. And it's just a real godsend to be able to go back. And I'll be going in October, and we'll be training our first mentors who will be able to lead the youth work and encourage the youth workers in those territories. I myself could never, I can go to Nazareth, and I can go to Bethlehem, and I can go to Ramallah, but I can't go to Gaza. So in many ways, the program is doing what we had hoped it would do, reach into areas where it's difficult. I'm praying that God will use it in Central Asia, where we have our churches that are underground, because it's in Russian, and many of those countries speak Russian still. So just be in prayer for these beautiful people, these wonderful believers in Israel. And when you think of Israel, think of how they are continuing their silent but yet strong and powerful witness. There are many countries that I could share about this morning, and there's not enough time, but each of these maps just represents a work that's ongoing or that we've had a solid connection with Horizons. And we're hoping that in the next few years that many of these will be rolling out national training programs. The Netherlands, for example, has just finished training their youth secretary, and she'll be using it as a national curriculum, and on and on. So we're moving in ways that we had not anticipated. I did a bit of an audit about 3 months before I came, and I wanted to have an idea of how many countries we'd worked in the EBF family. Now, we've touched almost all of them in some way, but the long-standing relationships and the friendships that we have in these nations just really moved me and touched me that in 10 years we were able to have that kind of an opportunity to reach out and to encourage youth workers in these countries. I know you see names and I know you see the flags, and they don't mean a lot to you, but I wish there was some way that I could have people come and share their own stories and convey what's going on in their countries, because they would tell of wonderful, wonderful things. Sometimes just little things, and sometimes really exciting big things. But we're just really privileged that there are faces, names, people who are even as we speak now, getting up this morning and getting ready to go to church in any one of these nations to worship God. And we're so grateful to be a part of that. We want to just raise a few prayer requests. One for our seminary, IBTS, and I thank you, Darlene, for praying for the seminary. Our seminary will be moving likely in the next few months or next couple of years, because we've the economic crisis hit our seminary quite bad. We've also trained so many of those leaders that were once behind the Iron Curtain, and now many of them are starting seminaries, which we are thrilled for. but there's dozens of seminaries being planted. So we don't have as many students coming to our core seminary. The IBTS seminary in Prague, which moved from Switzerland 17 years ago, is the institution of higher learning for these countries. And so we have to move to a more affordable place, another place that will be located in a nation somewhere in Europe. It won't affect us directly. We won't have to leave Prague because as working for the EBF, I can be in any one of any nations. All of our staff members live in different countries and throughout Europe. So we're not going to be uprooted mercifully. But pray for the seminary. Huge transitions for our students, our staff. Some of our staff will be let go as we go into a new epic of our seminary. So be in prayer for them. Also to pray for the new Acadia Divinity College ADC's Doctor of Ministry program they'll be running in Prague starting in September. Actually, 2 days after we get back from home assignment, we'll be running our first Doctor of Ministry program, which is the only one available in Europe at this moment, in continental Europe. We're very excited about it. Full complement of students registered and ready to go from across Europe, the Middle East, even one in Australia who's coming. So we're really excited about this. It's a new venture. I'm directing the program on behalf of ADC, and Deanna's assisting in this program, and we're really excited about what God will do with this. No matter where it goes, wherever the seminary goes, we'll follow. But we'll just have our intensives wherever the seminary goes. But pray for this new program. We're a little nervous. It's a first go at this, so I'm hoping everything works well and goes correctly the way it should. Also pray for the next Baptist World Alliance, teams, yes. We have teams that come occasionally, and we would love to have teams, intergenerational teams, retired people. If you ever have a passion for serving in a short-term capacity, we love to have teams. We had a team a year ago who came. It was the Baptist Women of Ontario, Quebec, and they were a tour de force. Man, they were so excited about getting in there and teaching English. They were retired school teachers and a few other people of different backgrounds. And one of our members was 72 years old. We had to keep up with her. She was so a real go-getter. But we had a lot of fun with them, and we enjoy having teams. So pray for our future teams that may come. Maybe you yourself would be interested in coming and serving in Europe. And finally, to pray for the Baptist World Alliance's youth conference. Global Youth Conference, which takes place next year in Singapore in July. I serve on the committee that organizes this. I've been involved in the previous one, which was in Leipzig a few years back. And this one promises to be an amazing conference. If you know of any young people who might benefit from going to a gathering of believers from around the world, it is life-changing. And this is why I'm so passionate about it, because I've been involved in several through the years. But it's a great opportunity. So if you have any questions, you can call our convention office, get in touch with Dale Stairs, and he has the local details in terms of the team that will be going. There will be even some mission teams that will be associated with this on their way to Singapore. And we just pray that God will use this for young people around the world. As a family, we've changed a lot in the past 10 years. We have grown in so many ways. We've grown numerically as well. We have Matthew as a part of our family now, and we've just seen God help us through so many things, the difficult times, celebrating the amazing times of growth, and it's impossible really to share in so many words just what God has done, but we are so thankful for your participation through many of these years. Many of you have followed us through this time in prayer and support financially, and it's meant a lot to us, and your prayers are tangible. We feel those prayers. I'm going to ask the family to come up now.